Empress Orchid by Anchee. Chapter 4. I heard the sound of my dangling headwear and earrings. The girls in front of me swayed gracefully in their magnificent silk robes and high platform shoes. The eunuchs walked back and forth around the seven of us, constantly responding to the hand signals of Chief Eunuch Shem. We passed through countless courtyards and arched doors. Finally, we arrived in the entry hall of the Palace of Peace and Longevity. My inner shirt was soaked with sweat. I was afraid I would humiliate myself. I glanced at Nuharu. She was as calm as a moon in a pond. A lovely smile hung between her cheeks. Her makeup was still immaculate. We were led to a side room and given a few moments to freshen our appearance. Inside the hall, His Majesty and Her Majesty were said to be sitting. When Shem went in and announced our arrival, the air around the girls intensified. Our small movements made our jewelry clatter like poorly made wind chimes. I felt slight dizziness. I heard Chief Eunuch Shem's voice, but was too nervous to figure out what he was announcing. His syllables sounded distorted, like those of an opera singer playing a ghost, speaking in stylized tone. A girl next to me suddenly dropped. Her knees had given in. Before I was able to assist her, the eunuchs came and removed her. Buzzing noises filled my ears. I took several deep breaths so I wouldn't lose control like the other girl. My limbs were stiff and I didn't know where to place my hands. The more I thought about calming myself, the worse my composure became. My body began to tremble. To distract myself, I stared at the artworks around the doorframe. Calligraphy written in gold on black wooden board featured 4 characters: Cloud, Absorption, Star, and Glory. The girl who had collapsed returned. She looked pale as a cut paper doll. His Majesty, Her Majesty, Chief Eunuch Shem announced as he entered. Good luck, girls. With Nuharu leading me as the tail, 7 of us were guided through a wall formed by the eunuchs. She would fall as soon as I started recording. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. I've started using my new ring light and camera stand, and oh my god, first of all, I'm able to now change the colors of the light to give myself a better visage. So I'm using like a yellow light right now. Picks up the undertones in the skin really well. Because she doesn't use filters. I like my face. So I'm happy with the face that God gave me. So she uses it. But lighting is just, yeah, the yellow light is doing favors. I'm really enjoying this because the stand that I have now is much stronger to hold the camera. The first one I got, it just, and getting angles was stupid. Now I feel like a professional. I'm not, but I feel like one. We are re-entering the world of the Imperial Harem, and you know it's one of my favorite topics. It's so fascinating. So let's pick back up where we were in the story, because it's been, oh my goodness, I think a couple of months since I got into any of these novels. I've been so enraptured with my warhammering, I forgot that there were other things I loved. But I'm reading from 2 books in tandem that are in the same world, the same chronology, by Anchee. I'm reading Empress Orchid, and I am also reading The Last Empress, which is the continuing story of Empress Orchid. When we left off, poor little Orchid had gone through the process of what it takes to be approved to be a bride of the emperor. She comes from the Yihonala tribe, which she was raised much differently to the girls who knew they would one day be presented to the emperor as a choice for imperial brides. She was allowed to basically run free as a kid, as free as a little girl in ancient China could be. Um, it was still a time of foot binding. Her feet were not bound. Yihonala tribe did not do that. So we stand with Yihonala. No breaking 4-year-olds' feet for the sake of beauty and control. Um, she was allowed to play outside. She can read men's writing, which I know doesn't seem like a big deal, but they didn't teach women anything except house stuff, and how to please their husbands. That's all women were taught back in the day. And I'm only talking about this particular society. I'm not talking about all societies. There's actually a couple of tribes in South America they've discovered that are complete matriarchies, where it's like the reverse harem anime. Like, there's a woman who leads the tribe, and then she has a whole bunch of studs. Basically. So there are all kinds of societies out there. We're just focusing in on one. And remember, we evaluate literature within the context and with it's written, right? Yeah. We are not casting judgments or dispersions. It simply is what it is. And we get to enjoy the great artworks that our authors give us. But Yihonala, Orchid, because they go by their tribe names in the imperial court. They don't get actual names. I mean, the wives might talk to each other and use their casual names, but they are presented as the tribe they represent. And Orchid, Yihonala, the tribe she comes up with, lucky her, she had a good childhood. She was closer, I believe, when I think back into when I first read these books, the part of the country she grew up in is closer to like the Mongols. So they a much freer version of society than when you get closer and closer to the imperial palace. So it seems like vicinity to the imperial palace like determines like how strict you grow up. Like the closer you get to greatness, like the rougher your childhood is. But she was never raised to think that she would have a chance at being an imperial bride. Her father had a position in the government. He passed. So, I mean, back then, in this society, a woman's fate was completely tied to the men in her life. Confucius instructions for women, his first instruction is, when a daughter, obey your father. When a wife, obey your husband. And when a widow, obey your son. The society is set up for women to never be disconnected from men. A woman's fate lives and dies by the man in the household she's connected to and her ability to produce sons. Yes, I know modern science tells us that it is actually the men's half of the DNA that determines the son. They didn't care. They didn't know that, or if they did, they ignored it. So that was a woman's value, was in the men she was with. And Yihonala's father passed. And when they are on their way to bury him, and they've lost everything because no man, no money, and nobody has pity on people back in those days. There's, well, your man died, and the gods must hate you. Like, don't bring your bad luck over here. Someone that had interacted with their tribe when she was much younger recognizes them on the roadside and takes pity on them, and actually helps to get the funeral paid for, and remarks that she is quite beautiful enough to be a bride of the emperor. I don't think, and this is just a sidebar, I don't think most people know what they look like. Like, I'm looking into a camera lens right now, so I see myself. But think about it, without mirrors, without cameras, we don't see our faces. We don't see us most of the time. So for someone to take a comment to remark to her, girl, do you know how cute you are? Like, you're fine. You are royal quality in just your beauty. And he actually tells her mother, like, you better get this girl off the road. Somebody gonna snatch her off the road, because she's like 15, 16 years old. Which about the age, they would take them in the palace as young as, like, I think 14 back then. Like, if you were getting your monthly moon water, the expressions. She loves words, but if you were getting your monthly moon water, you were eligible, basically. And you had to be of a house of decent stature. But honestly, the emperor, he was the son of heaven. He could have any girl he wanted in the country. When the emperor was out looking for wives, when it was time for him to bring an empress into his fold and to establish his harem, any girl in the country could have been part of it. If he was just rolling down the street and was like, "Ooh, she's cute," he can. That's what it means to be the son of heaven. It's just how it works. But she makes it through, and it's a humiliating process. Like let's be really really clear. Even though for these young women, a lot of them may have been taken out of poverty, they may have been taken out of bad situations. To be in the imperial harem is to be in a gilded cage. Your freedom is gone forever. The majority of them will never walk beyond the walls of their cloistered palaces ever again. And their fates hang on whether or not they produce an offspring, and preferably a boy. That's it. Their families will probably receive some type of societal elevation to have a daughter married into the imperial harem, but most of them will never see their families again. They'll never see their mothers. They'll never see their fathers. If they have siblings, they'll never see them again. They are property. They're pretty property. They get fed well. They get a nice place to live. They get servants. But even their position is not secured unless the emperor takes favor on them and impregnates them. That's where their life hangs. And if the emperor passes, the emperor could be 27 when he dies. They expected to die with him. Okay? Yeah, like he goes, y'all go. Or you're supposed to cloister yourself in an old part of the palaces in the innermost part where you just linger until. That's what it means to become a part of the harem. And whoever is named Empress, when in the emperor can basically choose whoever he wants. He's gonna get some guidance on that because politics. You gotta pick a girl who's of a family that you need, so that other things out in man's world happens the right way. So the empress herself is usually like pre-picked, but any old other girl can end up in the rest of the harem, and it's a battle to be head wife, basically. To be the favorite. It's a tender position to be the favorite because, one, if you're the favorite, that means your family is also being favored. That's part of why you want to be the favorite. Because if the emperor loves you, he loves the people you come from. They're getting promotions, kids getting into good schools, family getting lands, houses, and all that kinds of stuff. If you're not favored and you're forgotten, bad for you, because even amongst the servants, they choose loyalty to these girls. They measure their character when they come into the palace and make determinations on, is this a girl I'm going to be loyal to, or am I going to watch her and then snitch all over the place on her every action? Because even your servants are spies. There are very few people these girls can trust when they come into the palace. They're cut off intentionally from everything they've known. And then what they're walking into is just a maze of treachery and lies. It's incredible what is crafted in the royal palaces. So that is what Yihonala is walking into, and that's why she's so nervous. When they're going through the process of being chosen, it's humiliating. They're just turned into slabs of meat, basically. I mean, they took this out of Memoirs of a Geisha, but when the girls are taken to go see if they're eligible to, go to Guion and become something in the pleasure district, their intactness is checked. I said what I said, and they do it to these girls too, to see if they are intact in front of people. Now, granted, the eunuchs have had their manhood removed. If you didn't know what a eunuch was, that's what it is. It was brutal back then, y'all. Like, for men to work in the palace, because there couldn't be men around the harem who could impregnate them. Every baby that came out of that harem had to be from the emperor. Period. Like they half the time didn't even trust their own brothers around their harem. It was just like, that's why the screens exist. Like the women sit behind the screens. Like you can't even look at my women. Like, no, they don't exist to you. They're mine. But they need men because men physically can do things, as far as like, the lifting and all that the women could not. So there are uses that they need men, especially as guards and stuff like that. But to send your son to be a servant in the imperial palace, if he wasn't a soldier, he was going to be separated from his member. And they didn't all survive that process. Yeah, so it was the harem's a whole thing. And when in Beijing, when the Forbidden City was built, it is still to this day the largest private palace that has ever been built. and they called it the center of the universe, which if you've ever seen it live and in person, you can see why. Insane. But it is a city unto itself, and there are walls in there that separate the different parts of the palace. There's where the public enters, there's where the emperor lives, but the innermost part is reserved for the imperial family and the imperial harem. They are kept in the back of the palace, and when the girls enter, they actually come in palanquins. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically you might have heard it called a sedan chair, but they're completely enclosed, and there's like 4 dudes carrying them on poles, and they're sitting in basically a phone booth. And they're not allowed to peek out on purpose. And when they take them into the palace, they purposely make it take as long as possible, and they wind and wind and wind so the girls can't find their way out on their own. Let that sink in. So they gonna check your intactness in front of other people, in front of people who've had their intactness removed. I mean, like, literally there's somebody who's hired to come in and like up and down to make sure that they smell good, like in all the places, because you can't send a stinky girl to the emperor. That's not gonna work. It's humiliating. And then to intentionally confuse them when they're taken to where they're going to live so that they have no idea. And if they are ever blessed to go outside of the palace to maybe go to the summer palace with the emperor, or the winter palace, or he wants them to accompany him on a boat trip or something, they are put in the palanquins so that they can't be seen by the public, but also so they can't see. That's what it means to come into the harem. You are trapped. So yeah, a girl faints. Absolutely. I feel you, girl. I'd faint too. Because it's more than just I'm about to meet the emperor and his mother. My whole life is over. That's what these girls are thinking. They chose me. It's over. My whole life is just duty and hoping I produce a baby. And pray to heaven that I produce a son. Because if I don't, they're going to kill me. They could potentially kill my whole family. That's a lot of pressure to put on a young girl. And you have to remember, these girls are all between the ages of like 14 and 19. They're young. They don't know anything. Some of them, like Nuharu, who Orchid has become kind of friends with through the process. The girls don't know it, but Nuharu has been pre-chosen to be Empress. She was raised for this role. She comes from a family that they need alliance with. And from her earliest days, she was raised as if she was going to be the Empress. She knows exactly what to do, exactly how to act. She is not fazed by this whole process. She has been indoctrinated to know that her freedom, what little of it she had, was going to be taken from her. She has lived behind the gates her whole life. This is just Tuesday to her. She's like, whatevs, another man's in charge. It's Monday. But for the rest of them, who may not have grown up that way, especially for someone like Orchid, for Yuhanala, she's just, but she steadies herself and she holds herself and she finds her strength. And now they're going to be presented to the emperor. Let's see how that goes. Emperor Xian Feng and the Grand Empress Lady Jin sat on a king, a bed-sized chair covered with bright yellow silk. Her Majesty was on the right side and His Majesty on the left. The rectangular room was spacious with high ceilings. There were 2 potted orange coral trees on each side of the room against the walls. The trees looked too perfect to be real. The court ladies and the eunuchs stood against the walls with their hands folded before them. 4 eunuchs, each holding a long-handled peacock feather fan, stood behind the chair. Behind them was a huge tapestry with a rainbow-colored Chinese character, Shou, longevity. Looking closer, I noticed that the character was made up of hundreds of embroidered butterflies. Next to the tapestry was an ancient fungus as tall as a man in a golden pan. Opposite the fungus was a painting entitled "The Immortal Land of the Queen Mother of the Middle Kingdom." It had a Taoist goddess riding a crane into the sky, looking down at magical landscape of pavilions, streams, animals, trees, under which children played. In front of the painting that was carved, red sandalwood container lay. It had a riotous mass of double gourds, blossoms, and leaves carved in high relief. Years later, I would learn that the container was used to hold tribute gifts to the emperor. The seven of us performed the kowtow ceremony and stayed on our knees. It seemed as if I had just stepped onto a stage. Although I kept my head down, I could see the beautiful vases, the magnificently carved legs of the water basins, the floor lanterns with tail lace touching the ground, and large good luck locks draped with silk around the corners of the walls. I ventured a glance at the Son of Heaven. Emperor Xian Feng looked much younger than I imagined. He seemed to be in his early 20s and had a fine complexion. His large eyes tilted upward at the corners. His expression was gentle and concerned, but without curiosity. He had a typical Manchu nose, straight and long, and firm lips. His cheeks were feverishly red. He did not smile when he saw us enter. I felt like I was dreaming. The Son of Heaven was dressed in full-length golden robes sewn into fabric where dragons, clouds, waves, the sun, the moon, and numerous stars. A yellow silk belt rounded his waist. Hanging from this belt were green jade pearls, precious stones, and little embroidered bags. His sleeves were the shape of a horse's hoof. His boots, His Majesty wore the most magnificent I had ever seen. Made of tiger skin and dyed tea leaf green. They were inlaid with tiny gold good luck animals, bats, four-legged dragons, and qi lin, a mixed lion and deer, the symbol of magic. Emperor Xian Feng did not appear to be interested in meeting us. He shifted in his seat as if bored. He leaned to the left and then to the right. He glanced repeatedly at two plates between him and his mother. One was made of silver, the other gold. On the silver plate were bamboo chips that bore our names. The Grand Empress Lady Jin was a plump woman with a face like a dried-up squash. Although she was only in her early 50s, wrinkles hung from her forehead to her neck. As Big Sister Fan had told me, she was the favorite concubine of Tao Kuang, the emperor before His Majesty. Lady Jin was said to have been the most beautiful woman in China. Where had her beauty gone? Her eyelids drooped and her crooked mouth was pulled toward the right side of her face. The rouge dot on her lip was painted so large that it looked like a giant red button. The robe Her Majesty wore was made of radiant yellow satin decorated with cornucopia of natural and mythological symbols. Sewn into the dress were egg-sized diamonds, jade, and precious stones. Flowers, rubies, and jewels dangled from her head and covered half her face. Her gold and silver necklaces must have been heavy, for Her Majesty seemed to lean forward under their weight. Bracelets were stacked from her wrists to her elbows, locking both her forearms in place. The Grand Empress spoke after a long and silent observation. Her wrinkles danced and her shoulders went back as if she was tied to a post. "Nuharu," she said, "you have come highly recommended. I understand that you have completed your study in the history of the imperial household. Is that true?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Nuharu answered humbly. "I studied for several years under tutors introduced by my grand-uncle, Duke Chai." "I know Duke Chai. A very accomplished man." The Grand Empress nodded. "He is an expert on Buddhism and poetry." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Who are your favorite poets, Nuharu?" "They are Li Po, Tu Fu, and Po Chui, of the late Tang and early Song dynasties." "Yes, Your Majesty." "They are my favorites too. Do you know the name of the poet who wrote Awaiting Husband Stone?" "It is Wang Qian, Your Majesty." "Would you recite the poem for me?" Nuharu rose and began. Where she awaits her husband, on and on the river flows, never looking back, transformed into a stone, day by day upon the peak. Wind and rain revolve. Should the journeyer return, this stone would utter speech. The Grand Empress raised her right arm and wiped tears with her sleeve. She turned towards Emperor Xianfeng. "What do you think, my child?" she asked. "Isn't that a moving piece?" Emperor Xianfeng nodded obediently. He reached out his fingers and played with the bamboo chips on the silver plate. "Tell me, my son, do I have to wear out this seat to get you to make up your mind?" the mother asked. Without answering, Emperor Xianfeng picked up the chip with Nuharu's name on it and dropped it in the gold plate. At that sound, the eunuchs and the court ladies drew their breath in unison. They threw themselves at the feet of His Majesty and cheered, "Congratulations! The first wife of His Majesty is selected." Chief Eunuch Shim hailed toward the outer wall. "Thank you." Nuharu kowtowed with her forehead lightly touching the ground. She took time to complete her bows. After the third, she rose and then threw herself down on her knees again. The rest of us went down on our knees with her. In a perfectly trained voice, Nuharu said, "I wish your Majesties 10,000 years of long life. Your luck shall be as full as the East China Sea, and your health shall be as green as the southern mountains." The eunuchs bowed to Nuharu and then escorted her out of the hall. The room returned to its former quietness. We stayed on our knees and I kept my chin low. Nobody spoke or moved. Unable to tell what was going on, I decided to peek again. My breath stopped the moment my eyes met the Grand Empress's. My knees jerked and I hit the ground with my forehead. "Somebody is trying to hurry up." Emperor Xianfeng spoke with a hint of amusement in his voice. The Grand Empress made no response. "Mother, I heard thunder," His Majesty said. "The cotton plants in the countryside will soon be drowned in rain. What can I do with all the bad news?" "First things first, my son." The Emperor sighed. I had an urge to look at His Majesty again, but I remembered Big Sister Fan warning that the Grand Empress disdained girls who were too eager to catch the Emperor's attention. Once the Grand Empress had ordered one of the imperial concubines beaten to death because she seemed to be flirting with the Emperor. "Come closer, girls, all of you," the old lady said. "Take a good look at my son." "No fried cicadas for dinner," Emperor Xianfeng uttered, as if he were the only one in the room. "I said closer!" the Grand Empress yelled at us. I stepped forward together with the other 5. "Introduce yourselves," Her Majesty ordered. One after another, we pronounced our names, followed by the phrase, "I wish your Majesty's 10,000 years in life." My intuition told me that Emperor Xianfeng was looking in my direction. I was excited and hoped I could sustain his attention, but I knew I could not afford to displease Grand Empress. I kept my eyes on my toes. I sensed some movement from the Emperor and stole a glance while the Empress was asking of Chief Eunuch Shim why all the girls appeared slow and had no spirit. "Have you scraped them off the streets?" Shim tried to explain, but the Grand Emperor stopped him. "I don't care how you produce, I only judge by the goods you deliver. I am not pleased. I'll die drowning in the spit of the imperial ancestors." "Your Majesty," the eunuch got down on his knees, "I did not say that the good chime also needs a heavy beater to make it sound right. It all depends on how you tune the girls, a task which we all know at which you excel." "Death to your tongue, Shim." The old lady burst into laughter. The Emperor flipped the chips back and forth on the silver plate as if annoyed. You look exhausted, my son, the Grand Empress said. I am, Mother. Don't count me to come tomorrow, because I won't. Then you must decide today. Concentrate and look harder. I have, haven't I? Then why can't you make up your mind? Perform your duty, my son, before you are the best maidens in the kingdom that can be bestowed on her emperor. I know. It's your big day, Xian Feng. Every day is a big day. Every day a long metal stick is driven into my skull. The Grand Empress sighed. Her anger was about to spill over. She breathed deeply to control herself. You liked New Haru, didn't you? She asked. How would I know? The Son of Heaven rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. My head is full of holes. The mother bit her lips. His Majesty ran his fingers through the remaining bamboo chips, making a noise. My bones are screaming to have me lay down. The Grand Empress stretched in her seat. I have been up since 2 o'clock this morning, and it is for nothing. Shim shuffled up to his knees. His arms were up in the air, holding a tray with a wet towel, a powder box, a brush, and a green bottle. The Grand Empress took the towel and wiped her hands, and then picked up the brush to touch her face with the powder. After that, she picked up the green bottle and sprayed mist onto her caked face. A heavy scent filled the room. I took the opportunity and raised my eyes. His Majesty was looking at me. He squashed his nose and mouth together as if he were trying to get me to laugh. I didn't know how to react. The mocking continued. He seemed to be more interested in getting me to break the rules. My father's teaching came to mind. Young people see an opportunity where older people might consider it a danger. The Son of Heaven smiled at me. I smiled back. The summer is going to be nice and breezy. Emperor Xian Feng played with the chips. The Grand Empress turned her head toward us and frowned. My thoughts went to the girl who had been beaten to death, and my back was instantly wet with sweat. The Emperor raised his right hand and pointed his finger at me. This one, he said. Yi Honala? Chief Eunuch Shim asked. I felt the heat of the Grand Empress's stare. I lowered my eyes and endured long, unbearable silence. I have done what is required, Mother, the Emperor spoke. The Grand Empress offered no comment. Shim, did you hear me? Emperor Xian Feng turned to the eunuchs. Yes, Your Majesty, I heard you perfectly. Eunuch Chief Shim smiled humbly, but his attention was to give the Grand Empress the opportunity to say the final word. Then, yes, finally came. I sensed His Majesty's elation and Her Majesty's disappointment. I wish Your Majesty's 10,000 years of long life, I said, struggling to gain control over my trembling knees. Your luck will be as full as the East China Sea, and your health as green as the southern. Wonderful! My longevity has just been shortened. The Grand Empress interrupted me. My knees gave in and my forehead was on the ground. I'm afraid I just saw a ghost, the shadow of a ghost. The Grand Empress rose from her chair. Which one, my lady? Chief Eunuch Shim asked. I'll catch it for you. Yes, Shim. Let's call everything off. Suddenly, there came the loud clang of a bamboo chip being thrown into a golden plate. Time to sing, Shim, ordered the Emperor. Yi Honala stays, Shim sang. I couldn't remember much after that, only that my life had changed. I was startled when Chief Eunuch Shim got down on his knees in front of me and called me his mistress and himself my slave. He helped me back to my heels. I didn't even notice what became of the other girls or where they had been escorted out. My mind was in a strange state. I recalled an amateur opera back in Wuhu. It was after the New Year's feast, and everyone was drunk, including myself, because my father let me sip the rice wine so I could see how it tasted. The musicians were tuning their instruments. The sound was oddly mournful at first. Then it turned into the sound of a horse being beaten, then broken and strained. The notes sounded like wind whistling through the Mongolian grasslands. The opera began. The actors entered dressed in women's gowns with blue and white floral prints. The musicians hit the bamboo tubes with sticks, and the actors sang and beat their thighs. Crack, crack, crack. I remember the sound. It was unpleasant, and I couldn't understand why people liked it. My mother told me that it was a traditional Manchu performance mixed with elements of Chinese opera, originally a form of entertainment for commoners. Once in a while, rich people would request it to be performed to taste the local delicacy. I remembered sitting in the first row. My ears grew numb from the loud drums. The sounds of the sticks beating the bamboo tubes felt like a hammer coming down on my skull. Crack, crack, crack. My thoughts were beaten out. Nobody told you to go that hard, Anchee men. Nobody told you to write that hard. It's a beautiful novel. I love historical fiction. It's next to my Warhammer sci-fi, which that's its own thing. Historical fiction is by far my favorite genre of writing. Growing up, Charles Dickens was my favorite author. There's not a work by Dickens I've not pored over at least 3 times in my lifetime. I do like real historical novels, but they can be a little heavy because they're real. But this is definitely based in a world that did exist. That's why historical fiction, I think, is so valuable, is it gives us a peek into how other societies worked without talking about the real people. But rest assured, everything that Anchee men wrote about is based on events that happened. To think about how my life could have been if I had just been the result of other genetic pairs getting together. What we think we might want in life, but the reality of what that life is, sometimes are very different. And that's why I'm grateful for a lot of these stories, especially when it comes to peeking into what royal life or high society life was like. Like I love me some Jane Austen. If Keira Knightley's in a Jane Austen, I'm gonna watch it. I am there, because we think those are the lives we want. But the reality of living in those gilded cages is usually far harsher than most of us would ever expect life to be. Like, yeah, you get the best of everything, but you're also a prisoner. So there's that. Like, I may not have the best of everything, but I get to make my own choices, and that's kind of great. I will take that any day. But I'm glad I'm getting back into the journeys of other books that I love. There is so much I love to do on my channel. That is why we are the Well-Rounded Nerd. I don't ever want to cloister myself into just liking one thing or reviewing one thing. Like every Wednesday I do Warhammer because W's, it works. Warhammer Wednesday. But I'm going to continue to read from novels, play video games, talk about anime, look at action figures. We are a well-rounded nerd. Don't silo yourself into only liking one thing. It's good to be a well-rounded individual that likes and enjoys many things, because this is a beautiful world that we live in, and there is just too much out there to learn and enjoy to only like one thing. We don't do that here. We love all of the nerdity in all of its forms. You can love Elmo and Pochita. You can also love Hello Kitty, Fruits Basket, and Baby Yoda. What's behind me here? Oh, that's the Promised Neverland. Directly behind me. You can love it all. It's totally okay. That's what this channel is. We are well-rounded nerds. So I hope you enjoyed that reading. I am going to get back into reading novels more. I'm glad I found a moment to pick that back up. My work schedule has been nuts. There's been so much going on, and on the day I'm recording this, I will actually be taking my hair down because these braids, I grew used to the colors. She loves her pigtails. I kind of love putting my hair in pigtails. I haven't done that in a long time. But summer is upon us, and she needs summer color. So the next color, wait till you see it. I'm going to have a temporary in-between color while I wait to get back to my hairdresser, but just wait for it. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Anywho, so as usual, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.